At New York's JFK airport, an elderly man with a worn jacket clutched a first-class ticket, but instead of respect, he faced cruel laughter. Staff mocked him. A wealthy traveler tried to buy his seat, and he was told to move to economy because he didn't belong. What no one knew. This fragile old man wasn't just any passenger. He was the secret owner of the airline. Subscribe to Black Battles and hit the bell icon so you never miss our latest powerful stories. It was close to midnight at John F. Kennedy International Airport in New York, where bright neon signs flickered across wide glass walls and endless announcements echoed through the crowded terminal. Tired travelers dragged heavy suitcases, rushing to catch late-night flights. In the middle of this chaos, a frail figure strolled, as if carrying the weight of a lifetime on his shoulders. His name was Henry Collins, a man in his late 70s. His back was slightly bent, his steps unsteady, and his clothes far from the polished attire of most first-class passengers. A faded jacket clung to him in the winter chill, and in his hand was a weathered leather bag that looked decades old. Yet despite his simple appearance, his eyes held quiet determination. Henry's trembling hands clutched a first-class ticket to Los Angeles. He checked it again and again, as if afraid it might vanish. To the strangers around him, he looked like someone lost, out of place in a sea of glossy travelers dressed in suits, heels, and luxury coats. A few glanced at him with faint smirks, wondering what business this old man had in first class. But inside Henry's heart, a storm was brewing. This wasn't just a journey. It was a statement. After years of sacrifice and hardship, working long shifts, saving every penny, and often denying himself comfort, he had finally chosen to experience something better. For once, he wanted to sit in comfort, to be treated with dignity, to feel that he belonged among those who could afford luxury every day. As he approached the check-in counter, Henry's eyes gleamed with a fragile hope. He didn't know that the next few minutes would test not only his patience, but also reveal truths about dignity, power, and respect. Henry Collins stepped carefully toward the first-class check-in counter, holding his ticket like a fragile treasure. Behind the desk stood Emily Carter, a young staff member with a sharp smile and impatient eyes. She glanced at Henry's worn clothes, then at the bold letters on his ticket. For a moment, disbelief flickered across her face. "First class?" she muttered, raising an eyebrow. "Sir, are you sure this is your ticket?" Her voice wasn't loud, but the passengers waiting in line leaned in. A tall man behind Henry let out a mocking laugh. "Maybe it's Charity Week," he joked. "Somebody must have given him that seat for free." The others chuckled, their eyes narrowing with the same doubt Emily carried. Henry's lips trembled, but he stood firm. "I bought it myself," he said softly. His tone carried dignity, though his frail voice was barely heard above the hum of the terminal. Emily smirked and waved her colleague Jason Miller over. "Hey, you've got to see this," she whispered loudly enough for nearby travelers to hear. "Grandpa here thinks he belongs in first class." Jason studied the ticket, then looked Henry up and down. "Sir," he said flatly, "first class is usually reserved for professionals or premium travelers. Maybe you'd be more comfortable in economy." A murmur spread among the line. Henry's hands tightened around his bag. "I paid the full fare," he replied, his voice stronger this time. "Why am I being told I don't belong?" But his words were met with smirks, shaking heads and low chuckles. What had started as a simple check-in was quickly turning into something far more humiliating. Unaware to all, this moment of cruelty was about to set off a chain of events none of them could have imagined. Henry's face flushed as the whispers and laughter around him grew louder. Every glance seemed to pierce him, reducing him from a paying passenger to an object of ridicule. He straightened his posture as best he could, clutching his ticket like a shield. "I worked hard for this," he said firmly, though his voice cracked. "I earned the right to travel first class," but his words only seemed to fuel the mockery. Emily leaned over the counter, lowering her voice but keeping the sarcasm. "Sir, we're just trying to be practical. Maybe someone like you would feel more at home in an economy, you know, with the rest." Before Henry could reply, a sharp voice interrupted. A man in a sleek designer suit with polished shoes and an expensive watch strode up to the counter. Richard Kane, a wealthy investor, placed his gold card on the desk. I need a first-class seat to Los Angeles, Richard demanded. Jason shook his head. I'm sorry, sir. First class is fully booked. Richard smirked, leaning closer. Then make it happen. I'll pay double. No, triple. The air grew tense. Emily and Jason exchanged quick glances before their eyes flicked toward Henry. The message was clear. Jason turned to Henry with a thin smile. Sir, perhaps you'd consider moving to economy. We have a very important client here. It's in everyone's best interest. Henry's jaw tightened, disbelief spreading across his face. You mean because I don't look rich enough? I should give up my seat? The line grew silent. For a moment, only the distant sound of rolling suitcases echoed in the terminal. The humiliation had turned into something darker, something that questioned not just Henry's dignity, but the very meaning of fairness. Henry stepped aside from the counter, his trembling hand still clutching the ticket as though it might vanish if he let go. He lowered himself onto a cold metal bench nearby. His chest felt heavy, not from age alone, but from the sting of humiliation. Around him, travelers hurried past, some whispering about the scene, others pretending not to notice. He bowed his head, whispering under his breath as though speaking to himself. All my life I worked, paid my taxes, raised a family, served my community. And now, at the end of it all, I'm told I don't belong. His voice broke, but he forced back the tears clouding his weary eyes. For decades, Henry had denied himself luxury. Vacations were rare, comforts postponed, every penny saved for his children's future. This first-class ticket wasn't about comfort alone. It was about dignity, about finally allowing himself one moment of peace. Yet now, that simple desire was being stripped away, not by poverty, but by prejudice. A few passengers glanced his way with sympathy, but no one stepped forward. Others murmured to one another, shaking their heads as if agreeing with the staff. The wealthy man, Richard Kane, tapped his foot impatiently, confident that the matter would be resolved in his favor. Henry closed his eyes for a moment, drawing in a shaky breath. His reflection flickered in the glass wall across from him, an old man who had given the best years of his life to his country, now treated as though he were invisible. But as despair weighed on him, footsteps approached. A new presence cut through the tension, and Henry opened his eyes to see flight manager David Parker striding toward the counter, his sharp gaze locked on the unfolding scene. David Parker, the flight manager, approached the counter with a firm, steady stride. His years in the airline industry had trained his eyes to read people quickly, and what he saw now disturbed him. An elderly man sitting alone, clutching a ticket, his face clouded with humiliation. The staff's uneasy expressions told him enough. Something was wrong. What's going on here? David's voice carried authority, cutting through the restless hum of the terminal. Emily hesitated before answering. It's nothing, sir. Just a misunderstanding. This gentleman's ticket. Henry lifted his trembling hand, showing his first-class boarding pass. His voice cracked as he spoke. I paid for this seat, but they told me I don't belong. They want me to give it up, for someone richer. A silence swept through the line. David took the ticket from Henry and examined it carefully. The barcode, the seat number, the purchase details, everything was in order. He turned sharply to the staff. This ticket is valid. Absolutely valid. No one has the right to deny this man what he has paid for. Jason shifted uncomfortably. Sir, we were only thinking— You weren't thinking, David snapped. His voice, though controlled, was edged with anger. You were judging. That's not your job. Every passenger who buys a seat deserves respect, no matter what they wear or what they look like. Henry's eyes welled, but this time it wasn't from humiliation. It was relief. For the first time that night, someone was standing for him. David placed a reassuring hand on Henry's shoulder. Mr. Collins, you are traveling first class. No one can take that away from you. But as the tension eased, Henry knew the truth was still hidden. Soon, his identity would change everything. The tension at the counter thickened. Richard Kane, the wealthy businessman, tapped his gold watch impatiently. Manager, he said, his tone icy, I'm offering 3 times the price. Surely your airline values real customers over sentiment. His eyes flicked dismissively toward Henry. David Parker's jaw tightened. "Sir, this seat belongs to him." "Money doesn't rewrite fairness," the crowd murmured. Some passengers nodded in approval, while others exchanged uneasy glances. Henry sat silently, his hands gripping his weathered bag. The humiliation still burned, but something else stirred inside him now, a need to speak the truth. Slowly, Henry rose to his feet. His voice, though soft, carried an unmistakable weight. "Enough," he said. The terminal seemed to be quiet as he lifted his ticket for all to see. "You've all decided I don't belong here, but perhaps you should know who I am." Emily and Jason frowned, confused. Richard folded his arms, unconvinced. Henry took a deep breath. "My name is Henry Collins. I am not just a passenger. I am the founder and majority shareholder of this airline." The words fell like thunder. For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air. Then gasps rippled through the crowd. Emily's face turned pale, Jason froze, and Richard's smirk vanished. Henry's gaze swept the counter, his eyes filled with quiet disappointment. "Tonight I came as an ordinary man, not as your employer, not as someone with power. I wanted to see how my airline treats its passengers. What I saw was not just unprofessional, it was shameful." David stood straighter, suddenly realizing the gravity of the moment. Passengers pulled out their phones, recording, whispering in shock. The very man the staff had mocked as unworthy was, in fact, the owner who had built everything they worked for. And in that instant, the balance of power shifted completely. The terminal stood in stunned silence. The very passengers who had chuckled moments before now stared wide-eyed at Henry Collins, the fragile old man revealed as the powerful founder of the airline. Emily and Jason's faces drained of color, their earlier arrogance replaced by sheer panic. Richard Kane, the wealthy businessman, shifted uncomfortably, his polished confidence cracking under the weight of humiliation. Henry steadied himself, his voice calm yet commanding. "When I built this airline, I built it for people. For families, for workers, for elders like me, not just for the wealthy. Tonight I saw my own staff forget that principle." He turned toward Emily and Jason, his eyes sharp. "You didn't just insult me. You insulted every passenger who looks different from your idea of belonging. David Parker." Standing beside Henry, spoke firmly. "Mr. Collins, I can vouch this man's ticket was valid." "He was being mistreated," Henry nodded. "And you handled it with integrity, Mr. Parker. That is the kind of leadership this airline deserves." He looked back at the guilty staff. "There will be a full investigation. Those found responsible for discrimination will no longer serve this company." Emily and Jason's pleas of apology fell on deaf ears. Henry's expression was stern. "Respect is not optional. It is the foundation of service." Passengers around them erupted into applause. A young woman, her voice breaking with emotion, called out, "Thank you, sir. Tonight we all learned that dignity is worth more than wealth." Others echoed her, clapping louder, their support washing over Henry like a wave. Henry inhaled deeply, his frail frame straightening with pride. For once, he wasn't just the hidden owner or the overlooked old man. He was the reminder of what respect truly meant. As he boarded his flight, passengers watched with newfound reverence. The lesson lingered in the air like a promise. From that night forward, every traveler, rich or poor, would be treated as equal. And Henry Collins, the man everyone had underestimated, had left behind more than a story. He had left a legacy,